to go. All right, cool. Well, yeah, as I said, my name is Harrison Stovall. First off, thank you guys so much for having me. It's great to see everybody out here. Brief aside before we get into stuff, and at risk of actually taking up some of my time. Oh, actually, I just realized I'm supposed to be screen capping this. I gotcha. 1 second. All right, I think we're back. So yeah, I just want to say, kind of cool thing, I was recently over in Europe for about a month, and it was an absolutely amazing experience. But while I was over there, I found my way to London for a weekend. And I didn't really know anyone there. Like, it was just completely random trip. I had no idea who I was going to meet there. So I went to a bar and just started talking to some people. And I heard the people next to me talking about just random stuff. And all of a sudden, one of them says something along the lines of, yeah, that back-end code refactor we were doing earlier, that was a nightmare. And I was like, hey, sorry to be eavesdropping, but story of my life. How's it going, guys? It turned out they were developers at Expedia, and we got just to talking and had a great conversation about everything from like code to our countries to all that stuff. So I only say that to just kind of say this stuff right here, getting together, talking about code, what we like to do. It's a global thing, and it's really cool because it can open so many doors just sharing what we are passionate about. So it's great. So without further ado, let's get going. I always find myself asking at these things, who is the random person that's talking to me right now? You know my name, that's about it. So my name's Harrison. I graduated from the University of Arizona with a degree in biomedical engineering, and I'm here to talk about JavaScript. I promise it'll be interesting. I've been doing web development for about 4 years now. I found my way into a startup just on a whim in college, and it was a great experience. And so when I graduated, I continued that, and I now work for a great startup here in town called Volantio. I'm going to call you guys out. A couple of my coworkers are here tonight. Thanks for coming. We're a very small company. We have 9 people now, I believe, and we've recently moved to Atlanta from San Francisco, where the company originally went through the Y Combinator incubator. So it's been a great experience, and we've absolutely loved the welcome we've had here. We work with airlines to try to improve their marketing, and a big part of that is using JavaScript, because on the front end, if you need to track what people are doing, there's really no other way to do that than by listening with JavaScript. So we use it heavily throughout our code to keep tabs on people and get them just better and better information about what sort of flights they can find, what sort of deals they can get. And it all comes back to JavaScript at the front end, sending that data to us so that we can get a good read on what they want so that we can get that to them. And another important information about me is, of course, as with most developers, I have a fondness for coffee. Figured throw that one in there. So let's talk about JavaScript. So JavaScript, as you all know, was originally for browsers. It got its start as kind of a piece of glue code that was thrown together. I read this recently. In about 10 days, the first prototype was put together. Now, there are plenty of jokes I can make coming from that about the quality of JavaScript as a language being thrown together in 10 days, but it has gotten better and better and better over the years. And now it's used almost everywhere, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. How JavaScript can be used just about any platform, and in a sense is really starting to kind of take over because of just how many different platforms you can reach with one language. It was made to be easy. It was made so that we could get together and we could learn it quickly and we could get projects going in no time. So a brief aside for how things kind of moved along from browsers to everything else was JavaScript got good and it got fast. And that wasn't the original idea. It was originally just meant to be a quick little glue piece of code to allow interactivity on websites. But then people started implementing these crazy fast engines that run it. So for those of you who are less familiar with the underlying infrastructure that keeps JavaScript running, it's a scripting language. It's taken in as text and it's converted into code that the computer can actually run against its processor and everything. And so the piece of code that does that is called an engine. You have a few of the most popular ones. You have SpiderMonkey on Firefox. You have Nitro on Safari, and what most of us are using, if we use Node, for instance, is V8. That's the one that Chrome developed. And that one really kind of set the bar very high for how much of a performant language JavaScript could be when it was done correctly. And so on top of just JavaScript getting fast, people started writing really good stuff for it. And other people started seeing these frameworks like Angular, React, and various other things. And other developers kind of started saying, that's great on the browser. Could I use that elsewhere? And so JavaScript began to make the move from the browser to servers. And surprisingly, when I was doing research for this talk, that's not new at all. JavaScript on the server was actually implemented just a few months after it was first created. Netscape decided to make some back-end code that could run JavaScript on the server almost immediately after JavaScript was created in 1995. But it just didn't catch on. It was slow at the time. JavaScript was going to slow your server down when you could be writing other languages on there. It only gained traction in the last decade or so with, as I mentioned, V8 being pulled out of Chrome and put into Node. You could run very, very fast JavaScript code on just about any platform. And servers have been benefiting from that ever since. Huge companies use microservices that are written entirely in JavaScript to run massive services that we use every day. And so it made the move from browser to server. So from there, it kind of just became a logical next step. Well, this is good. This is working great. Where else can we use it? After all, it's just code. I mean, that's all it is. It's running against a processor, whether it's somewhere off in a server farm or whether it's sitting in my computer right here. We can run it anywhere. So it made the move to computers. And Node can be used on computers just like it can be on a server, but you can also wrap up an entire browser minus the bookmarks bar and all that good stuff inside a package that's easy to distribute. And that keeps it easy to make sure that your system calls don't have to vary based on whether I'm using Windows or Mac. So it lets developers write one piece of code for basically every platform, which Electron is a great example of that. So show of hands, who's used one of these applications on their computer? That's kind of what I thought. I used both of them for a few hours today. Those are both just web apps. That's all they are. If you go in the source code, I mean, there's, of course, hooks to hook into the system calls that are probably not JavaScript. But for the most part, they are just web apps. A good example of that is Spotify had a bug, I guess you should call it, for a while, where in their app, if you had a touchscreen, you could pinch to zoom in the Spotify app, and you could basically blow out the entire user interface because it was just HTML. And they finally patched that. But the gist of it is those applications, we use them all the time, but they're just web apps. They're JavaScript, they're HTML, they're CSS. We could write them. So then, you can't see this, but my PowerPoint just crashed. That's fun. No, actually. Thank you, Microsoft. They're not one of the sponsors, right? No, we're good. Please hold. Okay, so we've covered browsers, we've covered servers, we've covered computers. Well, phones got fast. They can run code. They can run all kinds of code. So people started writing websites that could be used on phones. They would write them in JavaScript because JavaScript got fast, and phones had enough RAM and CPU power now, starting kind of with the iPhone a few years ago, to handle it no problem. So people started writing websites that were very, very good at running on phones. And then the next logical step was, well, hey, why do I need to go through a browser to get this? I can just kind of wrap that up like we were doing on the desktop before. I can run it as a mobile app. And so that's where things like PhoneGap came in, if any of you guys are familiar with that. I'm personally not a massive fan of PhoneGap, but I have actually used React Native, which is what Facebook developed. So React became very popular on the web. It's great at handling data. It's great at updating your views in real time. It's great at just keeping things very organized. And so they were kind of thinking, well, we use this on our server or in our client. I wonder if we could use the same code base over on mobile. So they wrapped everything up in React Native, and they made a system where you can actually now write code that is just JavaScript. And you can run that in a browser, you can run it on Android, and you can run that on iPhone. So now everything's kind of come, and you can basically write on almost any platform in JavaScript. But then things started changing a little further, and we started moving away from just devices, just platforms like PC, Mac, phone, servers. We started getting into things. Everything started running code, whether it be light bulbs, whether it be thermostats. Everything started getting smart. And like everywhere else, JavaScript kind of started following that. There we go. Almost did it again. So JavaScript started moving over to things as well. Now, Raspberry Pis, for instance, who owns a Raspberry Pi here? They're great. And they're really fast. They're very cheap. You can write just about anything you want on a Raspberry Pi in JavaScript running on Node. There's even NPM modules you can install that will let you actually manipulate the GPIO pins, just flipping them on and off using simple JavaScript calls. So JavaScript can be used just about anything, anywhere. And the event-driven nature of JavaScript, the asynchronicity of it, is great for that because, I mean, if you're waiting for somebody to, say, turn the thermostat down, it makes a lot more sense to just have an event listening for that than to be sitting there in a loop all day. So that is kind of how JavaScript took over the world. It just was a very simple language that was easy to learn. It was easy to implement. And the engines behind it got so good that people wanted it elsewhere. And it moved from browsers to servers to desktop to mobile to things. And it's just about everywhere now. So an example of how easy it is to do stuff with JavaScript, I've put together a little bit of live coding stuff because that always works great. And we are going to see how that goes. I'm going to warn you guys ahead of time, I do have a canned version of this ready to go in case all crashes and burns. But we're going to try to do a little bit of work on that now. So this is just a, hold on. Glad it looked. There we go. So here's a simple server written in Node. What I've done is I've hooked up Express, which is one of the most common servers for Node. I think that's wrong terminology, but. And we have Express running there, we have Socket.io, and this will give us real-time communication to our server. So what I'm doing here is I'm just sending static files over, and I'm sending a static landing page over whenever you hit the home page of this. So what we're going to, yeah, I can do that. PyCharm doesn't have a quick way to do that, but not that I know. If anybody else does, feel free to throw it out there. Better. Cool. Yeah, so we're serving static files. So let's actually have some fun. I was talking earlier about how JavaScript is great for doing event-driven things. Let's actually hook up the socket here. So there we go. So Socket.io just uses the simple syntax of on events. So we can listen for connections. And when we get a connection, we'll have a socket. Now all that's going to do is basically have information about the client that's connected. So in this case, we're going to throw this up live in a little bit, and you guys are going to be able to connect to it if you want. This will have information regarding the connection status you have, whether you're connected or not. So when somebody connects, I'm going to send out an event that tells us how many active users we have. And that's just going to send out the amount of clients. So you can already see, it's very simple to start throwing things together. This would already actually send you the client count if I were to push this code live right now. So I've created some helper functions down here, save some time. So we can publish information to the socket. And a couple more things we're going to hook up our click event, which is going to change a color. I'll show you where I'm going with this in a second when we get to the front end side of things. And publish the changes. And last but not least, when the socket disconnects, I can pick up on that very easily. And I can alert people again that the client count has changed. So where I'm going with this, I'll give you a little high-level view, is I wanted to do sort of a demo that showed how easy it was to have real-time communication from a server written in JavaScript to a web app written in JavaScript, or I guess just a web page. And not that I don't trust you guys, but I didn't want to do the generic chat application because throwing a bunch of text up on the screen inevitably leads to some weird things. So I decided to keep it simple and just have a random color generator that when you tap on the screen, it will go through automatically and people's phones will update in real time. So we're going to do that. So this is basically everything I need to hook up on the back end. I have my events ready to go, and the last thing to do that I'm going to cheat a little bit here is hook up the actual server itself, listening for the calls. So that's all it takes to set up a backend in JavaScript, is just this little bit of code. It's incredibly quick to do. And then on the front end here, we're going to, let's see, hook up some event listeners on the document. Like so. We're having click and touch start and touch end. That's for cell phones. And then last but not least, we need to communicate with the server in a similar method to what we were doing before on the back end. We have connect, active users, change color, changes, and disconnect. So what these will do is this will let us actually have the events going to our front end so that we can update the colors in real time, and we can have them going back to the back end to tell everybody else what's going on. And not terribly interesting. I've thrown together just a simple little front end with basically just the div elements I need. Now, live coding is it goes sort of slow. So what I've done is thrown together the example already. And if we go to this website here, if you guys want, I promise it'll only download 1, maybe 2 viruses. But if you go check that out, let's see if this works. So in real time, we can see people coming in. See, we have our user count down at the bottom. We have changes as you guys click through. And as we randomly progress, basically through sine waves, we're pulsing different colors. So I have not tested this with more than, I think, 4 people. So I'm actually very interested to see how well Socket.io holds up under an entire room of people tapping it. Yes, I can. I'm sorry about that. How's it holding up so far? All right. So yeah, we were talking earlier about how performant JavaScript can be. The fact that it's listening to for reference, the server I have this set up on is the smallest tier of Amazon AWS instances you can get. And just those 30 lines of JavaScript are listening to your connections as they come in, listening to the events in real time. And we're handling quite a few events per second over there. No problem, really. So yeah. The gist of that is to show how easy it is to throw something together in JavaScript. So I hope that was pretty much the entirety of the talk I had. I hope I've been able to show you guys that if you're looking for a language to learn, if you're new to programming, JavaScript is a really good one. A lot of people have had their reservations about it as time has gone on, but it's gotten better and better throughout the years as people have just written better engines, and you can do almost anything in it these days. So if you're new to programming, you're looking for a language to learn, I would highly recommend JavaScript because, forgive the clickbaity title, it has pretty much taken over the world if you want to write on any platform. And with that, if there are any questions, I will be happy to answer them. I think we're running a little bit under time, so we have plenty of time if anyone wants to ask questions. And I may or may not have branded things to throw at you if you ask questions. So go for it. So for me, it just felt too browser-y, and I know that's the point. But I wanted better access. I wanted cleaner interfaces to talk to these system-level things like camera, file systems, notifications, and for me, it just wasn't quite there at the time. I haven't used it in the most recent version, so it's possible it's gotten better. But those were the issues I had with it, where the system calls just weren't quite what I was looking for. Oh, as promised. Would you like a branded teddy bear or soccer ball? All right. Anybody else have a question? All right. No, yep. Mocha from Octane on West Side. It's good stuff. How about you? I need recommendations. All right. Would you like a branded thing? You're good? All right. Well, I don't have anything else. If anybody else has questions, feel free to come up to me after. Oh, we have one more. So for Internet of Things, if you're interested in that, I highly recommend just going to Instructables and looking for things with Raspberry Pi. Instructables is a great resource for step-by-step instructions on everything from making your car autonomous. I would not recommend following those, but they do have how-tos, to just rigging up your thermostat to actually take network calls. There are so many very smart people doing great open source projects on there that it's a great place to learn. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As you move, come across stuff that was not intuitive, that you have one set of instructions, you have difficulties.
So one of the biggest things to get over when you start working in Node is that you don't have a DOM, you don't have a document. And that's fine, but one of the big things that I liked working with on the DOM was Canvas. And you don't have access to that unless you do some weird polyfills. So that was a huge learning curve for me at first, was realizing that all these browser-specific APIs that I'd kind of really begun to like using, suddenly a lot of them just weren't there because they relied on a browser, which you didn't have. So it wasn't a huge learning curve, but it definitely was there. You have to start to realize that if you want to structure things, you're living in a world of just data, not documents. So it's a little bit of a learning curve, but it's not too hard to get over. Cool. I don't see anyone else, so thank you very much. One more. So honestly, I am not the best prepared to answer that. I'll be honest. I'm not going to try to give you an answer that's thrown together here. But for the most part, it depends on the type of security you're talking about. So a project that I worked on was an API that was customer facing, and it talked to a bunch of microservices running on Docker that were all written in Node. One of the big issues was making sure that people couldn't get other people's data because it was a REST API, and so they were going to be hitting up generic endpoints. There's a lot of risk there if you don't do your job right for somebody to hit up /posts and suddenly get posts from an entirely different user that they should not be seeing. So a lot of what was handled there was just having a layer on top of the microservices to sort of police those requests and say, like, okay, this person with, ID this and credentials X, Y, and Z is trying to get this resource off of this other service. Is that allowed to talk to it? And sending back yes or no for the most part. So just like with any other language, it has its benefits and it has its shortcomings. I wish I had a better answer to give you. I do, but that's not something that I've done heavily, so I'm not quite ready to give you a solid answer on that one. Yeah. Anybody else? I think we're good. Well, thank you so much.